Hello everyone, we are Communicare Substance Abuse Prevention Services. We go out in the community and school systems throughout 6 counties and educate individuals like you on the awareness of drugs and alcohol. Prevention teams throughout several regions are finding ways to keep our children safe while learning from home. Over the next several weeks and or months, we would like for you to join us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for a spring online learning series. We will be discussing facts, data, and ways to prevent substance use.
Hello and welcome all to our second portion of the alcohol and nicotine prevention presentation. Just like last time, that was my supervisor, Ms. Shanterrica Pegues, and I am Charles Dingus here to give you all of the information you could need on nicotine, tobacco substances, and potentially prevention. Like I said in part 1 of the video, we will not be getting into things that you can expect to go through whenever you do decide to quit. However, we will be adding on some resources that you can follow, and Ms. kcard will read those off to you at the end of the presentation. Next week, we will be dropping another video, which will be on marijuana use and prevention, and we hope that you join us next time so we can kind of go over some of the same kind of information that we're going over today. This is a pretty short presentation, and we try to keep it pretty brief, that way we don't overwhelm you. But let's get started. So, nicotine and tobacco are commonly confused as being the same things. However, they are different. In this presentation, we're going to go over different types of tobacco products, as well as e-cigarettes, or more commonly called vapes. If you do already know about them, maybe we'll be able to add in some extra information. Now, we have the history of tobacco, which is nowhere near as long as the history of alcohol. Now, of course, we have left out a lot of different little tidbits, because if we included everything, then, well, the presentation would be much longer. But what we know so far is historians have found that tobacco itself is actually only indigenous to America. There are many different types of plants that are similar to it out in the world, but tobacco, the one and only, was originally an American product. And so Native Americans tend to have a history with it, but it didn't really get any worldwide recognition until Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America and brought it back with him to his native Portugal and Spain. And from there, it kind of caught on really quickly. Different types of tobacco products were very popular, from smokable tobacco to chewing tobacco to even snuff, which is a snortable version of tobacco. And from there, it was a very privately used drug or crop, and it eventually made its way through trade to Britain. And of course, Britain decided to commercialize it and capitalize on their product by distributing it throughout their empire. And that is how it became a slave crop in the American colonies. So from there, as a slave crop, it became very, very popular throughout the world. And whenever America went through its Revolutionary War phase, it was traded as a currency, because we didn't have any real gold of our own. So we traded it with other countries for resources, and even in World War I and World War II, as well as several other wars, the American government actually issued cigarettes to their soldiers. They would get packs to relieve stress in the battlefield. It's a very tough place, and they thought that nicotine was a great way to relieve stress. And it wasn't until the early 1990s, whenever the American public, started to realize that cigarettes were actually a major health risk. And so they were deemed a public health crisis in the 90s, and today, because of the Truth Campaign, as well as many other types of cigarette, we don't want to say abolition, but a lot of other anti-tobacco companies are doing what they can to reduce the rates of smoking. And it's been really successful until vaping hit the markets in the mid-2000s. So whenever that happened, it seemed like a pretty harmless way to quit. But nowadays, vaping is seen as almost, if not just as dangerous as actually using tobacco products, which can be really confusing to the general public. So let's look at the science. The science is actually a little bit unknown to me, but we do know that nicotine is highly addictive. In fact, it's just as addictive as heroin or cocaine. In fact, in pure doses, which is about 500 milligrams of pure nicotine, we found that it is actually fatal. Whenever scientists actually applied pure nicotine to brain cells, they found that it destroyed the brain cells and actually prevented new ones from being produced. So it does kill brain cells. Nicotine itself is actually the number one cause of preventable disease and death in the United States. Addiction to nicotine is at its highest that it's been in decades, and because of that, people tend to pick up cigarettes or other type of tobacco products, which can be extremely detrimental to the health. In fact, there are a number of diseases that we are going to talk about that actually are probably caused by nicotine use, if not directly associated with nicotine use and other types of risky behaviors. So the most important takeaway here is if you avoid nicotine, then you are much less likely to have the diseases that I'll be talking about in this next slide. So the known tobacco-related diseases are vast. Of course, we know all about how tobacco products can cause cancer. You might even know somebody that has had emphysema or some other type of lung disease associated with cigarette use. And of course, there are lots of different kind of cancers that you can get from these tobacco products. So we have different types of respiratory cancers like mouth, throat, and lung cancer. And then there's the cancers that you wouldn't think about, like skin and brain cancer. Now, the skin cancer is probably associated with immune system deficiencies caused by using tobacco products. And then brain cancer is probably associated more with the toxicity of nicotine plus oxygen deprivation. Now, the heart disease is a little bit more complicated. While nicotine and the carcinogens found in cigarette smoke and tar do have an effect on the heart, it's also much more likely that there are other risky behaviors that someone who smokes undertakes. So heart disease is also caused by poor diet. So people who smoke tend to also have a higher sugar and salt intake than other people and are much less likely to exercise. And that also has a major influence on diabetes. Now, with stroke and COPD, this is actually directly caused by blockages found in the lungs, which is more associated with the tar buildup that comes from using tobacco. Now, I could use slides to show pictures that are very graphic, but I think that we have all seen those pictures. But if you find yourself curious, go ahead and look it up for yourself with the presence of a parent or guardian, and share your comments with us in the comment section below. Now, they are pretty graphic, so I would say if you are squeamish, then it's best not to look it up. But I think it's always best to check things out for yourself. Now, these diseases are known to have been caused by carcinogen and tar. If you would like to discuss that further, please include it in the comment section and we will try to answer it back as quickly as possible. Now, moving on to vapes and e-cigs, we have a couple of different arguments that we hear more often than anything else. For example, we hear, don't e-cigs have fewer toxins than cigarettes? And while the actual physical, like hard substances, might be less toxic, like the oils, whenever you aerosolize those oils, it actually becomes very toxic to your lungs. Also, we hear, don't people use these e-cigarettes to stop smoking? And while some people might, there's no real evidence to suggest that it works. Also, there's actually more evidence that shows that teens that use Juuls or other vape devices actually tend to start cigarette use earlier than people who do not. In general, really, scientists agree that vaping is dangerous and harmful, but there's still a lot more research that needs to be done to really see what kind of detrimental effects these things have on our body. And like all things, only time will tell. But over the past few years, there have been some studies. For example, we have Lauren Chun and her colleagues found that the vegetable glycerins, or oils, glycols, nicotine, and additives for flavoring, when aerosolized, produce chemicals that are considered pulmonary toxins. Now, whenever I mentioned vape pens aerosolize the oil, that is actually the correct term instead of vaporizing. The companies that make vaporizers actually called it vaping because it sounds less harmful. But aerosol is the hazardous chemicals that are found in different types of spray paints and hairsprays and WD-40. Mostly contents under pressure that are very large particles that our lungs cannot process. And then a year or so after that, Ursula Martinez and her colleagues found that dual users, or people who smoke cigarettes and vapes, actually have a higher dependence on nicotine than people who use one or the other. And this was found in people who were trying to use vapes to reduce their cigarette use. So the people who were trying to smoke less actually became even more dependent on nicotine than they were before they even picked up the vapes in the first place. And there could be a lot of different explanations for that. The explanation that I've come up with is that the behavior of smoking a vape is actually much easier than smoking cigarettes, simply because cigarette smoking is something where you have to stop what you're doing, go outside, find a designated smoking area, and take that time to have your cigarette. Meanwhile, with a vape pen, you can virtually do it anywhere. You can go to a bathroom, you can do it while you're having a conversation with somebody. And so when it was cigarette use, that nicotine was a sudden burst. Your use of nicotine spikes over 7 minutes, and then it kind of lasts until your next cigarette. While with a vape pen, you can have a low amount of nicotine throughout the entire day, pretty much anytime you want. So that is why we believe that it increased dependence on nicotine, because people were using nicotine much more frequently. And then about a year after that study was released, the FDA actually took Juul Labs to court over their illegal marketing of their vaping cartridges and systems as a less harmful alternative to traditional cigarettes. And what we found about a day after that is that several people had been hospitalized and even died in association with their vaping use. And so this report by Vice and several other news sources actually began the investigation of the CDC into vaping-related lung illness, which became a hot issue at the end of 2019 and through the beginning of 2020 before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are actually a couple of culprits for that, but mostly it's the ingredients. So let's look at these ingredients. We have vitamin E acetate, diacetyl, and nicotine as the key ingredients that have led to what's known as e-cigarette and vaping-associated lung illness. Vitamin E acetate itself actually is a very common thing that we find in different foods and in lotions that we apply topically to the skin. Whenever it's found in food, our body is actually capable of digesting it, and whenever it's found in lotion, our skin actually really benefits from it. But whenever we breathe it in through an aerosol, our lungs are unable to process it. And so that's why it causes what we know as pulmonary embolisms or blood clots in our lungs. Now, these blood clots can get so bad that it completely disrupts our airways and can cause us to pass out or even develop more difficult lung problems like pneumonia and even emphysema if it progresses long enough. Now, with diacetyl, this is normally found in the popcorn that we find at like movie theaters and stuff. And this is an artificial butter flavoring that can also be used as a preservative. Now, whenever the black market producers of different types of vaping oils from THC to nicotine oils started using diacetyl, they were doing so to increase the shelf life, when eventually, as it goes bad, it becomes even more toxic to the lungs. I'm not completely sure about the science there, but I do know that diacetyl, when aerosolized, actually causes bronchiolitis obliterans, or popcorn lung, which is kind of a clever way to say that you smoked artificial butter flavoring and you got popcorn lung, which are little polyps found all throughout your esophagus and in your airways. And of course, there's nicotine, and as we discussed before, nicotine addiction is the number one cause of preventable disease in the United States and possibly the world. Now, when the CDC actually made these findings, it was an ongoing study that lasted throughout most of the end of 2019 as well as the beginning of 2020 until the outbreak of COVID-19. The most recent numbers that we have are actually from mid-February, but they didn't change much from January 21st until then. So as of January 21st, 2020, there were about 3,000 hospitalized cases throughout the United States, and there were 60 deaths that were confirmed caused by E-Vali, or e-cigarette and vaping associated lung illness. Now, the symptoms that are consistent with pulmonary disease caused by different vaping devices are cough, shortness of breath, chest pain, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, fever, and fatigue. Now, if any of these symptoms are present, it could be a number of different things, but if it's an association with you recently using an e-cigarette or a vaping product, then I would say go see a doctor as soon as possible. Of course, we don't want to overwhelm our doctors since they are working so hard these days, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. And that wraps up nicotine. Next up, you will hear from kcard, who will go over some community and online resources. Take it away, Katilyn.
If you or someone you know may be battling an addiction with alcohol or nicotine, there are many online resources at your fingertips that can help. If you're looking to find support networks and communities, the Communicare website can be very beneficial. You can find numbers to call in order to talk to someone during a crisis or schedule an appointment to sit down with a counselor. Gobi.support website is also a good place to find support as well. A good place to turn to in order to get useful and trustworthy facts regarding drugs and alcohol is the CDC website. Also, Prevention Technology Transfer Center Network. The National Federation of State High School Association Learning Center and Taking Down Tobacco websites have lots of good information about tobacco and vaping as well.
And so there you have it, folks. That wraps up our presentation. We hope you found everything to be informative and educational. Of course, this was not complete information. We always look forward to hearing from you through feedback. Maybe drop a comment in the comment section below, or even contact us through email, which I will be providing in the description below. Also included in the description will be different links to these resources, as well as the RRR website from which we get our curriculum. We look forward to seeing you next Monday when we drop our newest presentation on marijuana use, and marijuana use prevention. And until then, we hope that everyone does whatever they can to reduce their exposure to COVID-19 by washing your hands as frequently as possible. Never touch your face unless, of course, you have just washed your hands. Make sure you wear a face mask if you go out in public, and maintain social distancing of at least 6 feet between you and another person. But, of course, above all, practice good prevention, whether it is substance abuse or in the face of COVID-19. So, until next time, we hope everybody stays safe, stays clean, and that you take care.